afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Barriers to Political Participation and Leadership of Women in Brazil panel session on the occasion of CSW 65, organized by the Institute for Intercultural Dialogue in partnership with the Journalists and Martyrs Foundation. I am Cemre Ülker, the UN representative of the JWF. It's a great pleasure for me to deliver this brief welcome remarks at today's gathering. The Institute for Intercultural Dialogue is a Brazilian non-governmental institution founded with the mission of promoting intercultural dialogue, mutual understanding, stimulating thinking and empathy, encouraging the exchange of opinions, information, and experiences. Institute for Intercultural Dialogue applies the framework of UNESCO, EU, and other researchers and organizes programs through a process of exchange and dialogue of knowledge that it translates into the Brazilian reality, promoting critical self-awareness that leads to more peaceful social relations. We're almost done with the first week of the Commission on the Status of Women. It's been fascinating, really. In these 2 weeks, NGO CSW will be co-hosting over 700 panels organized by women's rights movements, civil society organizations, socially responsible corporates from all around the world. And this international occasion has once again showed us the value of online engagement that facilitates women's meaningful participation at all levels and really empowers the marginalized women and girls across the globe as they are able to voice their opinion way easier through the means of technological advances. Journalists and Writers Foundation has proudly partnered with the Institute for Intercultural Dialogue from Brazil many times at the JWF's UN occasions to create collaborations for the better implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this year, we will be hearing from experts in Brazil on the women's leadership in political arena. The Inter-Parliamentary Union and UN Women recently created the Women in Politics 2021 map, showing the global rankings of women in executive, governmental, parliamentary positions as of January 2021. The data shows that the number of women heads of states, women speakers of parliaments are at its highest, but the parity, when we look at the equality, it is still far from where it should be. So I'm glad to see the progress. I appreciate it, of course, but we still have a lot to achieve to increase women's participation in politics and leadership. Women's full and equal participation at all levels of society is really a fundamental human right, and our meaningful contribution requires a building block of access to resources, knowledge, formal training, social services, and of course, financial support. Today we have great experts to discuss this important topic in detail. We are live in YouTube too, so please write your comments or questions or feedbacks in the chat box either in Zoom or YouTube. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for today for this panel session. Gabriela Rondon is a feminist activist, researcher, and lawyer at the non-governmental organization Anis Bioethics Institute, and she is a professor of law at the Brazilian Institute of Education, Development, and Research. She coordinates the legal clinic Cravinas, Practice in Human Rights, Sexual and Reproductive Rights at the University of Brasilia. She holds a doctorate in law with experience in research in constitutional law, legal mobilization, and public health. Gabriela, thank you so much for being with us today, and I'm really looking forward for your valuable inputs. The platform is yours.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. I thank you, NGO CSW and the Institute for Intercultural Dialogue and the Journalists and Writers Foundation for creating the space for this debate. And it's really an honor to be here to help moderate this debate on a topic, the political participation of women in Brazil, which I believe is also at the center of the political, social, and even the health crisis that we are living. And I believe that this debate will give us some tools to understand what we are going on and what are the steps forward. And also, I believe it is impossible to start such a debate on this topic, and even more so in the month of March, without remembering that a few days ago, we mourned the anniversary of 3 years of the political assassination of Marielle Franco, who was a rising star of Brazilian politics. She was a Black feminist, bisexual woman, also a community leader in the Favela da Maré, and a city councilor in the city of Rio de Janeiro, who was cowardly murdered shortly after completing 1 year in office. And the crime remains unanswered until today, so we don't know who ordered Marielle to be killed nor why. So I believe that today, if we discuss this topic, is also in her memory and in the name of the human rights causes that she defended. And gladly, we have brilliant speakers with us today. I'm going to introduce them very quickly. I would have a lot to say about them, but I'll try to be brief. We have today Professor Renata Oliveira, who is a PhD in political sociology and also holds a master's degree in social sciences and a bachelor's degree in social sciences and law. And she's a researcher in the area of political science with emphasis in political behavior. And her main research topics are democracy, political culture, gender, and representation. We also have with us today Professor Marlise Matos, who is graduated in psychology and holds a PhD in sociology, but also complementary training in international human rights law. She is currently an associate professor at the Department of Political Science at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and a coordinator of the Center for Studies and Research on Women and the Center for Feminist and Gender Interest at the same university. And we also have here today Michele Ferretti, who holds a bachelor's degree in social sciences and is representing the Alzheimer's Institute, which is a nonprofit organization in Brazil that contributes to increasing the participation of women in politics and public management, reversing the alarming data of underrepresentation of women in Brazilian politics that dramatically impacts the quality of our democracy. So we have the three of them present their inputs to the discussion. Each of them will have from 20 to 25 minutes each. And after all of them, we'll have the collective debate. So please send your questions in the chat box. And with no more delay, we're going to start. I'll give the floor to Professor Renata Oliveira. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you all, colleagues. It's an honor to be here. I want to say thank you to the organization. We are living in hard times, and to pick this all and make this event happen, it's very important, and we have to continue to debate this kind of themes in this hard time. So I want to say congrats to the organization. I also want to say thank you for the invitation for the Cultural Dialogue Institute. It was an honor to me to be part of this space and this debate. So thank you to Hamed, Felipe, and the President Mustafa. And also I want to say that I'm very honored to be here and share this space with my colleagues, Professor Marlise, Gabriela, and Michele. So it's an honor, and I hope I can get a little bit of reflections and dialogues with you all. And so furthermore, I want to start my presentation and my speak. So I want to share with you here. So when they say to me that they want to talk about the barriers to political participation and leaderships of women in Brazil, my part and my role in this panel today is to present to you a little bit of the scenario of the political participation and where Brazil is in all that. So I prepare my speech in three different fronts, can I say, bases in some questions that we made, and I want to bring a little bit of answers of that. So the first one is how is the political representation and where Brazil is in that scenario. Second of all is why this debate about gender political inequality is so important when we're talking about democracy. So what is important we still talking about it. And third is about the barriers. So what the causes, né? This kind of underrepresentation, low representations in general. So I want to start with the first question. So how is the political representation and where Brazil fits on this scenario? I have to say that my sources are the Interparliamentary Union database, and the CEPAL is the Economic Commission for Latin America. So I bring, these are my sources from this data. So the first scenario that I want to show you is the global and regional average of women in national parliament from 1996 and 2021. So here I divide a little bit in region and global, and if you see the red line is the world average, okay? So we clearly have some kind of gaps here, especially when we divide the Nordic countries, that is the first countries that have the political codes. They have a little bit of historical promote more for the participation of women in national parliaments. So they really distinct from the other regions. So that's why I divided and don't include it in Europe at all, because this sometimes make a different scenario. The same way when we talk about America, we have North America, Central America, Latin America, South America, and these realities they are very different. So we can't show everything when we don't pick up the little difference, historical difference, and we don't take that in consideration. So this maybe show a scenario that really don't show all the truth about our historical data. So here I have to stand out this, and also the path that Latin America make in the last years. We all see that the Latin America is the strong blue line here, and the second one, Latin America, here we have we increase a lot the participation of women in national parliament, especially between the beginning of 2000, and this is because we have some kind of trend in Latin America, that we have more cults politics, we have more the impacts of the woman movement in the politics, we have some kind open for democracy, the starting of the process of democracy. So all these demands about justice, about equality, they all have more space in this time in Latin America to really have an impact in the rates of women in national parliaments. And also we can say that the economic development of the Latin American countries also help that, because the women become more strong in the force, in the labor force, and we have more politics for women, we have more politics, economic politics, political politics, social politics, that really have some kind of trend in the Latin America in the beginning, the 2000s and the 90s. So that's what we can see here, that when all this kind of politics, they start to have some impact, it's not the right way when we made it, but we can see now after 20 years, 10 years, we have this impact. So this is a thing that I think, something that I think is very important when we're talking about the promotion of politics. We have to think in the long term. We don't have to think the solutions are happening now. So the importance here I want to say is about this have the project for equality. We have to have politics that are in a project for more equality, gender equality, economic equality, and all the, it's a project for a better country. So we can see now in Latin America that we have this trend. Other region that I just wanted to stand out is this, the African region too, because this region really are together in that kind of trend. And when we see other countries from Europe, even in North America, we don't see this kind of trend continue. You know, we have some kind of stability, but I have to say that Africa, South Africa, and really countries like in this kind of region, they have stand up for that kind of politics. So where Brazil enter in that? Unfortunately, Brazil don't follow this kind of trend, but here I bring to you the overall the Latin American countries. So Brazil is in the end of this graphic, if you see, but we have other countries that I really want to stand out. So the blue line is the average of Latin America, and the red line is for the world. So in Latin America, we have a lot of countries that have more than the world average of women in national parliaments, and we have two countries that is two countries that are more than 50% of the parliaments of women, like Cuba and Bolivia. And so we have Mexico too, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. They have more than 40%. So in terms of parity, in terms of equality, that now we have to promote this kind of 50-50. So we have some countries here that are in this step. They are in this kind of way. But Brazil, we can see here, is in the over 10%. I'm sorry, my voice. So Brazil have more than 10%, but sorry. Today, Brazil have more than 10%, but that's not the historical of our country, because only in the last election, the 2008 and 2000, and now the last election in 2020 in the municipal council, we have more than 10% of women in the national parliament. And national parliament, we are talking about here Senate and the deputies of Chamber of the Deputies. So we have our Congress is bicameral. So, but overall, our historical is like that. In the end of the 90s, we have like 7%, and 2010, 80%, 2015, 10%, and only in 2080, we have more than 50%. And now we are in overall, this is the Brazil scenario. So Brazil is one of the countries that have some kind of, especially in Latin America, have a strong power in like political ways, have this kind of light up about the country, the dimension, the economics, all these layers. But when we are talking about women representation, we see a scenario that are disconnected with all this kind of economic development and all we heard about it. So why this happened? So why we are in a country that in the last 10 years have increased economic, and now we are not able to keep up that with equality, gender equality. So that is a question that make all my work now professionally, and I want to share a little bit of you over my thoughts and how this scenario is possible. So here I bring another graphic just for us to compare. The blue line is the average of men in Brazilian Congress, and the red line is the same graphic that I showed here on the woman. So with this comparison, we can see the gap is very huge. So when we take a little zoom in the red line, we think, oh, it's growing, right? It's cool. It's better. Of course, it's better. But when we compare, we have more, like more than 80% of the parliament is just men. So when we compare this line, we realize how huge this gap is. So we still have to talk about this kind of thing. So it's not some thing that we can just close our eyes. So this leaves our second question. So why we talking about it? Why this is important when we are talking about democracy? Is because there is some kind of mismatch between the process of democratization, this kind of this speak that we always see that the world is getting more democratic, but the reality of the democracy is not even close to that discourse. So when we're talking about democracy, when we are talking about develop democracy, democratization be strong, we cannot make this discourse and don't think about gender inequality, what is happened. So there is no democracy without gender equality. So the picture of the political disparity shows that we still are far away from understand the importance of these issues, because we say about it, but what the government that say is very democratic, what they are doing to promote democracy for women. So that's questions that we can do for our government. So democracy is based on principles such as equality, social justice, freedom. So this political inequality, the rate of women in all the parliaments, because we saw that the average now from worldwide is 25% of the parliaments are filled with women in the office. So it's not correct. We still saying that democracy is getting strong when we have 55% of the Congress are only men. So this is something that we can bring to that discussion about democracy. So why is it important to talk about it when we're talking about it to strengthen our democracy? Is because it's necessary for the quality of democracy, the implementation of more democracy institutional, more democracy politics, when we're talking about equality, gender equality, especially in places like Congress, parliaments. There are the spaces where the decisions are making, the decisions that impact all our lives. So when we don't have the groups that are important to that, that politics that are making these decisions are making. So if the thousands of these groups, we are not including these groups in the effects of these politics. So is this low this political inequality, so is an expression that the low presence of the democracy principle in democracy in the countries that say there are democrats. So we this is important because this relationship between political equality and democracy, political equality for genders and democracy is because this discussion is in the roots of what a country has. A country to be democratic, they have to be a country where have some politics and have a space, have an environment that promotes political equality between the genders. So that's why when we talk about democracy, we'll talk about democracy equality, we have to talk about this kind of issues. So what is the barriers or what is the causes of all of that? I bring here for you some kind of there is no one cause, and this is the same factors, they live in a dynamic that make these rates happen. So that's important. So maybe one politics don't work in the same way in the other country. So we have to talk about the dynamic of this dimension. So we have to start to talk about a dimensionality about these issues. So I bring to you three main dimensions here. Is the political institutional dimension, we have the socioeconomic and the cultural dimension. So how these dynamics work? In our researchers, we find out that, especially here in Latin America, this because of all the historic of the region, the countries, and the specific things that we have here, we have a dynamic that's different from Europe, that's very different from Asia, and the Pacific. We have our dynamic, but our dynamic works a little, the dynamic at all that works in the dynamic, like I'm going to show, the dynamic works in certain way, but the way these aspects will happen in the countries are different. That's why they have different impacts in the rates of political representation of women. So we talk about here how this three dimension works. So we have the socioeconomic path that we're talking about here, about the economic develop, about the scenario or socioeconomic scenario of women, the difference between men's access to education, healthy. We're talking about all these issues here. And we have two, the political institutional dimension. We're talking about here about political party, political, electoral, and the partisan systems here. Now we have codes, we don't have, how the political parties they work in this dynamic, and how this electoral system works. So we have that. What I bring that the cultural aspect, they work like they have a whole of mediator between the social, economic, the institutional barriers, and also they bring an impact in how this institutional is going to work and how this economic is going to work. Here I have to say that especially have a lot of example how the power of public opinion works when we are talking about some kind of political matters. So we know that some decisions are made based where the public opinions go. So the political culture, the public's opinions is in the political culture. So if we have more or less democratic principles like more participation for the public, political participation for the public. We're talking about democracy support here. So how this works? So what we find out is exactly that the political culture, they made this mediator between these others dynamics. So if how the political culture is constructed, how the socioeconomic is working, and how the institutional and political structures are based, they all work together for promote the political representation or for deny this political representation. So that's why we think in multi-dimension here, because they all working together. So the specific of a country will show how the intensity of the effect of each of one of this dimension. So it's a little bit here how this works. So how this works in Brazil, we see. So when we're talking about socioeconomic environment here, in the last years, we saw that Brazil improve a little bit into the early 2000s with women have, for example, we have Bolsa Familia. There was a very important politics for the empowerment of the women. Now they are the leaders of the family. We have some more active labor market and labor force for the women, and the general economy really increased that year. So we have some kind of more favored scenario. The institutional structure, there are a little bit of the problematic here, and I wanted to highlight the quality of the policy of the codes for women. Here I'm using a classification from Schwandbayer. It's a professor in the North America, and it's a lot some kind of requirement for we classified the quota, the quality of the quota policy. So there are three requirements: that the quota size, the order in the list, and the sanctions. So what do we have here in Brazil? Here in Brazil, we have 30%. Our political is 30% of reserve for women, and there is in the party lists. So, but that's not really obligation. Now we have some decision in the that made some parties they have to have that this percent reserved. We don't have a placement mandate here, so the women, they don't need to be in the beginning of the lists of the party lists. So this have impact in the quality of the code, and we don't have in the policy, we don't have sanctions for the parties that don't get this policy right. So we have a weak sanction strength here. So Brazil is classified with a low quality of codes. This is very important because the presence of the codes are important, but the quality of this policy is more important now. That's why we have to fight for a quality of these codes. We have to fight for codes that are 50-50, because all the countries that go to that way, they got good results. So we are now fighting for this quality. We, in the early 2000s and the end of the 90s, the presence of a code policy was very important, and we cannot deny that we have some effects, but in Brazil we didn't. So what is necessary now is to fight by the qualities of these codes. So now in Latin America, we are seeing some countries that make the 50-50 code size and have more sanctions and have disorder in the list. So this quality is important. So one of the issues in Brazil in the problematic way for the promote the quality of this representation is our low quality of this politics. And we now, in the last years, we are fighting to keep these codes in that way. We are fighting for that because we really saw that intervention in that was not problematic, so we don't need it. So we are living in this moment now. So for finish my lecture here, I'll talk about a little the political culture here when we're talking about the dimension of culture. What the last we are seeing that overall the Brazilians are supported for democracy when they are asked directly. But we now see some kind of oscillations in direct support. But what we are talking about is that we support a democracy directly when I ask you to, are you a Democrat person? Of course I am. I'm not going to say no. But when we think what democracy means and we get some other points, we show up that the central point in the position of the Brazilian is related, and we have a very important position here is related to inequalities and right of the minorities. So we really have some cultural barriers that are important, because these mean that the public opinion, we get this kind of opinions and feelings to get their opinion, to get their attitudes and opinion and form the public opinion. So this is what we find out, that we have some very important political and institutional barriers, but we really have important cultural barriers too. So these are the two dimensions that we can say that make Brazil in this point where we are. So overall, that's the scenario. I want to say thank you, and I'm very excited to hear you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Renata, for this very comprehensive scenario. And I want to remind everyone that is watching us that if you already have questions for Renata, please write in the chat box. We're going to concentrate all the questions by the end, but if you already have any, please just put in the chat box. And then we are going to hear Professor Marlise Matos. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Really nice to be here. Good afternoon for everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here this afternoon with you. I would like deeply to thank the Intercultural Dialogue Institute and also Journalists and Writers Foundation for the invitation. But I need to start saying that Brazil is now coming to 3,000 dead per COVID per day, almost 270,000 dead until now. It's really a genocide of Brazilian people. And I would like to dedicate this talk today to them, to their families, to all women in these families and all women in Brazil today, because they are struggling almost alone to defend their lives and the life of yours, and without almost no support of our national government. It's important to start saying that for all people to know what is happening here today in Brazil. I will share my presentation with you just right now. Just a second. So let's go. This is a picture where you can see how is the race of obstacles. I will start my chronometer because I talk too much. I need to be aware of my time. So this is a picture of how women are leading disputes, political disputes here in Brazil. Almost all the time, men are free to go and men are really in the front line of everything, and women are carrying out many, many, many layers of obstacles, many, many layers of problems they have to support and deal with. I would like to start with some indicators of political exclusion, but Renata did a very good work, a very important scenario and panorama. So I will pass really quickly for this part of my speech. But I would like to start then and to give a little attention to the race of obstacles that women in politics is really dealing with in Brazil. And the major issue in my talk today will be the violence against women in politics in the 2020 elections last year, because we have new challenges and old violences to talk about. So that's my itinerary I would like to speak with you. So I won't talk about this data because I would like to say that in Brazil today, women are 51.6% of the population, approximately 104,772 million people. We are talking about a huge amount of people here. We have 57 million households. And in these households, almost 41% of them have only a woman dealing with economic support to these families. So this is a problem also to talk when we're talking about political representation, because women today in Brazil are struggling to survive because they are almost all 50% the households responsible for families, for living, for child caring and everything. So, and also Brazilian women make up 52.5% of the country's electorate, and only 32% of them were candidates last elections last year. This is the situation, the regional in Americas situation of political representation. It's really a shame to see a country that has a geopolitical importance as Brazil has in the world. We are only in front of Guinea-Bissau, Belize, and Haiti in the Americas. All other countries in Americas, they have more women in politics, more women in parliaments than us. So this is really something that we should look at. So I won't talk about this evolution because Renata almost did a really good work. So thank you, Renata, for introducing this scenario. And I would let you with the scenes, these pictures, these images. This is the political representation in Brazil. This is almost an exclusive mandate of male, patriarchal, white domain. Representation in Brazil is just like this. I would like to talk with you of some barriers or filters that we have to access political power, institutional political power. This is a figure that you can see the recruitment process. In every step of this figure, you will see that we have plenty of obstacles that women have to face to deal with. First of the ambition, we have this divide. The public is male, the public is masculine, the public is political, and the private domain, the private spheres are female. The child care, the domestic work, the reproductive work is for women. And when you say that, and our gender roles are structured in this divide, we see that how women will be dealing with the ambition to be to have a political career. If when she come to the world, everybody's saying that, oh, okay, it's okay to be in the school, it's okay to go to the universities, but you have to marry. Almost all, today we heard that, women have to face. Now we have people are not aware about that, but the marriage in Brazil, we have rate taxes of young marriages here in Brazil that are scandalous. We have little girls of 12, 13 years that are being married, forced married in Brazil, and we don't talk about that. So how to have an ambition to be a political leader? If we see in the TVs that Marielle Franco, that was a city councilor, that had this bravery, that she was something, it's a force, a force of nature that was struggling for her people, and then what happens to her? She was murdered, assassinated with shots in the head, 6, 7 shots in the head. So this is the mirror that a young girl have to see when you're talking about political representation. This is the reward a woman receives when she has the ambition to be a political leader. So almost we are dealing with resources, political resources, economic resources. Women usually don't have political or economic or material or any kind of material resources to make their disputes. Only in the last election in Brazil, we are now having 30% of the financing for political parties to be for women candidates. And it was the first election with this transformation, with this kind of instrument. So we have the party system. In Brazil, we have almost 35 parties, and almost all of them with white men in the leaderships. So they are the gatekeepers of women's aspirations, women's ambitions to be a real candidate. And we have also the voters, the electorate, that almost all the time is thinking, no, I don't know, this woman is really fragile. She's not good to do that. Would be better at home. We have the political culture, as Renata was saying, is patriarchal, still patriarchal here in Brazil. And then if you are elected, finally you got there, do you think it has ended? No, you have to stay there, almost alone, by yourself, sustaining yourself in a jungle of white male politicians. So it's not a very pleasant place to be, I can assure you. And so almost all those filters and factors that I will call a racist patriarchy culture, you have almost all of these pushing away women for representation. So that's why we have a decrease in the number of Black women and white women candidates in Brazil, because all of those filters are In every step she made, she has to face violence. Now we have the name. It's a struggle for feminist theory, this kind of instrument that it's the politics of naming. We have to name political violence because this is not very known for everybody. It's not something that had almost stabilized in political theory, for example. So violence against women in politics is the reality, is the background that women has to face every day, every minute when she decides to be a politician. So institutional political power in Brazil is shaped and designed as a field of structured and gendered and race exclusion. Patriarchy and racism are acting structurally in representative politics almost all the time. I used to call it the white patriarchal domain, sustained by hierarchical naturalized structures inherent to our traditional and colonial gender and racial relationships. Racist patriarchy or patriarcado racista is this form of, it's not the only form of the organization of our families, our cultures. It is also the organization of our symbolic and political existence. So it is necessary to bring to light this biased form of representation supported by white male ideologies and privileges. So violence against women in politics is the language, it's the symbolic mean that is used to maintain, to sustain the patriarchal white mandate of political representation in Brazil. So, although usually non-recognized as an important political phenomenon, we need to say that violence against women in politics or gendered political violence has been exercised for years. And also in our parliaments. Every woman who has or is already or has been a candidate in politics has some history of this violence to tell. The concept of violence against women in politics gained visibility globally, especially by academic and activists. And academic activists of Brazil, of Latin America, of Bolivia, of Ecuador, of Mexico. Many academic studies are coming from Latin America. This is the starting point of this discussion. But empirical research is on this topic is still incipient. So I won't talk about all this timeline because it's it will take more time than I have. But it started, as we know, with the Inter-American Convention of Prevention and Punishment and Eradication of Violence Against Women. And then we have in 1994 and 2016, we have the first law on violence and political harassment against women in Bolivia. So this is our way to move in Latin America. And then when we see the theories, the political theory, the democratic theory, when we talk about in the field of political science, because I am in the political science department, almost all the time we talk about Mona Lena Krook, Jennifer Piscopo, but they are not the first ones that were talking about political violence against women. It started here in Latin America. It's important to say that. So I would like to take my last minutes telling you about the research survey that my center is conducting here. It is in process. It has not ended yet, but I would like to tell you about some preliminary results about this. We made this information booklet that is about violence against women in politics. It's very fine to have it in the cell phones. You can see them in your cell phones. It's for women to identify themselves with this kind of violence. It's important because they are not accustomed, they are not used to tell the violence they're really experiencing as political violence. So we have to say that to women and to aware them that this is political violence, you know. So we made this this information, this booklet information, and then we had to conceptualize something that is really in progress in political theory, in feminist theory. So we have the forms of the very important forms that almost all the treaties, the declarations of violence against women has already deal with, that are physical violence, sexual violence, symbolic violence, psychological violence, economic and material violence. And this is also kinds of violence that we will see in the political domain too. But we have this more extensive place that we can talk of political gendered violence. And then inside it, you have the political violence against women, the political violence against, I won't have time to make this, this thin connection with sexist that is different from violence against women, but if we have time in the debate, I can talk about it. So we have racist political violence, we have intersectional political violence. Then we have a lot of combinations that can happen here. So this is the profile of the victims. We have we opened this questionnaire. It is an online questionnaire. So we have opened it in November of 2020, and it is still there, open to collect information from women that were candidates and in the last year election. So we have 105 victims of reported in just right now, and 85 of them are candidates for city council. So almost all of them are responsible for their homes, for their domestic households. So they're dealing with a political campaign, a political dispute, and also dealing with their homes. So this is part of the problem, you know. When you talk about men disputing in politics, they have women at home to do everything for them, and women, they don't. It's not the beginning, but it's the part of a very important part of the problem that we have. So predominantly heterosexual women, and with balance between white and non-white women. And this is not a hazardous survey. People that want to inform are doing that. We don't have a previous election because it is not impossible to do that. So the marital status, most of them are single, most of them are married. A lot of women candidates from the Works Party answered our survey. And the predominance, this is the profile of the aggressions now. So the predominance of the misogynistic violence events, followed by slander, defamation, injury, difficulties in accessing political resources, and hate speech are the most frequent events that we saw in this data. The main triggers for violence against women in politics is the fact of being women, of course, but also the political ideological belonging, social activism, race, and social class. And the vast majority of them did not register any kind of official complaints about the violence they suffered. So they are really experiencing violence alone without any help. And the episodes were occurring online and also offline, the dispute. Because we have many discussions here in Brazil because because of the pandemic, the isolation and many things like that, people were saying, no, we won't have physical campaigns, we will have only online campaigns, and this is not true. We had in Brazil in 2020 people in the streets. Women were in the streets doing their campaigns. So almost half of the violence that were reported were offline violence. And this is the profile of the perpetrator, because we want to know if we can understand who is doing this violence. And as we can see, most of the aggressors are members of the Women's Party, unknown people, and the oppositor candidates. And in 105 women, only 68 were able to provide information about the perpetrator. And who are they? White men. That's the aggressors, the most frequent aggressors of women in campaigns. So, to conclude, finally, to overcome the gap in women in political exclusion, we need to recognize that we are dealing with a patriarchal white mandate in political representation. This is structurally rooted in elements of a symbolic political economy that establishes this hierarchical regime of gender and race and reproduces itself in the heart of the power and the decision-making institutions. The resilience of feminist and anti-racist movements were effective in denouncing that modern institutions are rooted in patriarchy and racism. These efforts must be finally recognized. This is the last frontier. It is urgent for us to overcome that renewal of an elitist project of politics and society are nowadays a huge problem in Brazil, in our society. An anti-democratic project that is based on patriarchy, that is repatriarchalization, is the force of this moment. And exclusion of women and male dominance is still on the center of this project. So the escalation of violence against women is an indicator or a proxy variable of the escalation of political violence all over Brazil. The variables such as gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality are not moral or customs or identity issues. They are fundamentally democratizing guidelines. The progress of contemporary democracies is measured by the advances made in the rights of these populations and segments. The publicity consented, if not encouraged, authorized escalation of political violence in Brazil is a clear symptom of the de-democratization of the country. The ongoing de-democratization reviews Brazil's process of democratic agony. And it is in the initial stage, in the escalation of social and political authoritarianism is only beginning in Brazil. How much science do we still need to understand what is going on? What happens when the open language of violence is the language of political representation? When violence at a certain point in late capitalism come to replace democracy or even interpose itself as a language that disqualifies and even dispenses democracy as a political regime. When does our horizon of struggles come up against a democratic political violence that has no desire for democracy, but only hatred, traditional white male order and discipline in a moment of pure, ultra neoliberal furor? The problem is that we really don't know. So I would like to thank everyone. I would like to thank Gabriela, Renata, Michele, and also our guests here today. I left you with questions, not with answers, because it's the kind of mood that I have today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Marlise, especially for the alerts that you gave in your lecture. Even if the scenario is difficult, at least I guess now we have very useful concepts in hand to understand what's going on, at least to understand what's going on and then to move forward. So thank you so much. And now we are going to have Professor Michele Ferretti. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Journalists and Writers Foundation for the invitation, as well as the Institute for Intercultural Dialogue. I want to say that for me, it's a great honor to be here sharing this, this panel with my companions, Renata, Gabriela, and Professor Marlise Matos. And I would like also to start my presentation by showing and expressing my solidarity with the families of the almost 300,000 victims for COVID-19 in Brazil, especially because what we see in the future is not good, and it's not going to be better if we consider the irresponsible way that our government has been conducting its politics to fight this pandemic. I would also like to start by saying that despite the historical underrepresentation of women in institutional politics in Latin America and in Brazil, women have played an essential role to construct the basis of our democracy and also to consolidate the human rights agendas in our nations. And I think that the progress, important progress, thus insufficient progress that we have been seeing in favor of human rights and against gender discrimination in Latin American nations is not by chance. Women have an important responsibility about this. But on the other hand, what we have been seeing is that as a response to the strong politicization of gender inequalities in the public sphere, a lot of rights and international agreements in favor of human rights and of women's rights specifically are being threatened in Brazil and also in other countries of Latin America because of a growing conservative offensive against gender equality. And therefore, under this scenario, I think that this debate is fundamental because the presence of women in spheres of power committed to the human rights agenda is very important and strategic. because we have been seeing the rise in popularity of ultra-conservative politicians who include sexist arguments in their campaign proposals, such as our current president. And this is a warning about the importance of developing mechanism, actions, and strategies to ensure that women not only have access to political positions, but also that to guarantee them governability and security when they then win the elections, as Professor Marlise was speaking earlier. I want to share with you my presentation. Let me see if you can see. Can you see it? Yes? Okay. So I'm one of the directors of Alzira's Institute. Alzira's Institute is an NGO that is committed to strengthen and amplify the presence of women in Brazilian politics. And one of our first works was to understand what happens with women in local politics in Brazil. We wanted to understand why women are so few in the institutional politics, and our hypothesis is that something happens in the local governments and further on that leave many women behind. So we wanted to listen to these women, not only because the local governments are an important entrance door to women in politics, but also because when this research was made, we had just gone through a very hard impeachment process against the first woman elected as a president in Brazil. And we wanted to understand the effects of this process in the elections in the municipalities in Brazil, and also to understand who were these women who managed to win the elections, what challenges they faced for being women in politics in the cities, and also what priorities they have. So we made this research called The Profile of Female Mayors in Brazil for those who were in the mandates of 2017 to 2020. We heard about 50% of the women running the Brazilian municipalities. This research was made by a group of researchers, myself and other 4 companions that I would also like to name and mention here: Marina Barros, Cíntia Melchiori, Clara de Sá, Roberta Eugênio, and also Thais Borges. So first thing that I would like to emphasize, I think these numbers, these figures, they demonstrate in the practice a lot about what my colleagues were expressing earlier in terms of the theory of political participation of women. First of all, women in Brazil are 51% of the population, but they run only 12% of Brazilian cities. This figure was not changed radically. Unfortunately, it keeps the same in the last election that happened in 2020. If we see the same numbers with the racial criteria, we will see that not only the political environment in Brazil is sexist, but it's also racist, because if it's hard for women in general to get into politics, it's even harder for Black women. The Black women are the biggest portion of Brazilian population. They represent 27% of our population, but they run in that period only 3% of Brazilian cities. And so they are what Lélia Gonzalez would mention as the silenced majority. This is what happens in our democracy. See if you can. Women are not only few in the cities, but they run the smallest and the poorest municipalities. So if and when they get to win the elections, this is possible for them only in the smallest towns and where there is not a lot of public resources to develop public policies. So they face even harder environments to work as politicians. If we sum the population of the cities run by women in Brazil, we would get to only 7% of our population. It's 12% of the municipalities, but only 7% of our population. This means that 93% of the Brazilian population is daily used to identify as a main political leader in their cities, where the politics is very concrete, a male figure. So this has also a very important symbolic impact on politics that is still understood as an arena of male dominance. When we look at the trajectory of these women, of these mayors, what we find out is that in politics happens exactly what happens in other spheres of our society. To get there and to be elected, women must study more, and they have more years of study than men. So if we look at the male mayors, half of them have completed higher education or university, while 71% of female mayors have completed higher education. And not only they have a bachelor, but 42% have also a postgraduate qualification. We see also that 60% of them, more than half of them, had also previously been elected to other positions. So we see that running for different times is also an indicator of greater success for women. When we ask them about their history in public policies, because we know that university in Brazil is still a privilege, and not everyone from every social class can access the university, even though we had important advances in terms of making the university more popular in Brazil in the recent years. We wanted to understand also what these women were doing in terms of practice. And what we see is that 70% of the female mayors had occupied non-elective public offices, or so they were already in the governments making public policies. But what we see is that we have like sexual division of the political work, because when we look where these women were, we see that the big majority of them were in the social assistance agenda, or in education agenda, or in healthcare agenda. So we still don't see women in finance or in other agendas of the public office so currently. We also asked them if they had political experience outside the government before being elected, if they had any political involvement. And what we see is that 88% of the women mayors had been immersed in political experiences, showing that women are in politics in Brazil. The problem is that it's not that they don't do politics or they don't like politics, if they don't have interest for politics. They are doing politics for decades already. It's harder for them to get in the top of the structure of the hierarchy of the political structure, because if we look, for example, in the educational area, where women are the big majority, they're the professors, the directors of schools. We just had a Ministry of Education in the 80s. So this tells a lot about how our politics is structured in terms of gender and race exclusion. So when we see 41% of them were municipal councils for public policies, other 41% had any kind of involvement in religious entities or solidarity groups. 33% were involved with social assistance entities, and 29% were involved with social movements or civil society organizations. When Professor Marlise Matos was speaking earlier about these barriers, these obstacles that women have to deal with, we have numbers here that tell a lot also about this. So if we look about the marital status of the female mayors in Brazil, we'll see that 3 out of 4 female mayors are married, 74%. And and from all these mayors, only 13% do not have children. Other 87% have 1, 2, or 3, even 3 children to take care of while they are in politics. So the next question that we asked them was about the division of housework in the home of these mayors. And what we found out is what the theory already shows, that to be in politics, these women need to count on other women to do their housework, because their husbands or the man in general, they don't take responsibility on this everyday care. So if we divided in household cleaning, washing and ironing, cooking, caring for children, elderly, and people with special needs, and shopping for food and basic things for the house. And what we see in all these activities, the big majority of the women need to count on a maid, a nanny, a caregiver, or a nurse to assume these responsibilities. In terms of cleaning, washing, and ironing, not one mayor said that the partner or the companion was the main responsible for this kind of activity in their household. In terms of shopping and going to the market to buy food, to buy basic things for house, half of the Brazilian mayors said that they were the main responsible for this activity in their house. Well, we also asked about main difficulties in the political career. We asked them to name the 3 main difficulties that they faced, and almost half of them complained about lack of campaign funds for having just or equal conditions to run to the elections. Other 30%, they talked about harassment and symbolic violence in the political arena. 24% talked about lack of space in the media in comparison to the male politicians. 23% talked about misogyny and absence of merit for what they say because they are women. 22% complained about lack of support from the political party or allied base. 22% complained about strength of household, and only 8% about lack of family support. In terms of political violence, this measures their perception. It's important to highlight that the question is, do you notice that you were somehow or someone victim of political harassment or violence because of being a woman during your career? And 53% said yes, while 47% said no. But it's interesting to notice that the perception regarding political harassment and violence is greater among the younger female mayors. So if we see among those who were less than 30-year-olds, the perception was of 91%. 91% of them said, yes, I was already a victim of political violence and harassment because I'm a woman. 70% said yes between the 30 and 40 years old. And while they get older, the perception gets lower. This can be explained because an hypothesis is that younger women suffer one kind of specific violence in the public arena, but what we think is that this reveals actually good news, because this shows that younger generations are starting to denaturalize, identify, recognize, and not find normal some kind of standards that they face in the political environment that is especially sexist and racist against women in general. When we see the same indicator divided by educational level, that is also some kind of index of social class somehow, we see that women that have less education are less less propense to identify the violence that they suffer, probably because they already suffer a lot of violence every day and they have to deal with it and face it so strongly to survive that some things end up being naturalized, even though they cannot be understood as normal in a society that reivindicates itself as democratic. One last thing about the institutions that are responsible for democracy in Brazil. I want to talk about the political parties. Political parties in Brazil have a long way to go to guarantee equal conditions for women to be in politics. Last year, we interviewed again the mayors to talk specifically about political parties. And one of the questions that we made, again, we interviewed almost half of them, and then we statistically treated the data so that they could be used for nationally. And one thing that we asked is, do you consider that women are represented in a balanced way in the main spaces of power and decision-making in your party? And the numbers are scary because 70% of them said no, and other 7% preferred not to answer. Why is this important? Because these spaces of power and decision-making places in the parties, they are fundamental, not only because they concentrate the power to decide which candidates have support for the party, who receives money for political campaigns, but also because these spaces accumulate a lot of public prestige. Women are people who occupy these places are recognized by the society and by their peers in this political structure as preeminent and important politicians. When all these structures is dominated by white men, it's really hard for women to overcome all these barriers and all these obstacles that were already mentioned by my colleagues in the earlier presentations. Another thing that we asked is that if these mayors had already participated in programs of training or any kind of programs for support for women political participations in their parties. And what we see is that the big majority of them said no. 56% of them said that they had never been taken place in programs of training or any kind of support programs for strengthening women's political party. Political participations in their parties, sorry. And what is interesting about these figures is that if we look at them in a racial perspective, we see that this is even more problematic when we see the figures against among Black women. While 50% of the white women said that they had not participated in these kind of programs, these 63% of Black women said that they had never taken part in any of these kind of programs. So I think this tells a little bit also about the racism and sexism in the structure of political parties in Brazil. And I'm not saying this to disqualify the political parties. I think they're fundamental for our democracy, but it's urgent that we discuss more transparent and more democratic structures in these institutions so that we can advance in terms of democracy in our country. One last question is that according to the Brazilian law, parties are obligated to destinate 5% of the party fund every year to the creation and maintenance of programs to promote and diffuse women political participation. When we asked about this obligation to the local governance, women local governments, more than half of them had never heard about these rights that they have. So they didn't know that this was an obligation of their parties. And when we asked about them, if their party informed them about the use of these resources systematically, almost 70% said, oh. So this also leaves to us some tips about how we must advance in terms of social control of the political parties. This means that we cannot put in discussion their autonomy to take decisions, but we must discuss how unequal these structures are. And while we don't talk about these issues, it's going to be always hard for women to take part in politics. I think the figures that Professor Melise Matos showed earlier about who are the main perpetrators of women, I think it tells a lot that the big majority who could identify their perpetrators said that they were companions of their same parties. I think we should talk about this inside these institutions and strengthen the fight of women inside these parties so that we can have a real change in our conditions. One last thing that I would like to say before I finish my speech, because we have a debate now, is that this pandemic has exposed women to a very fragile situation. Women were the most impacted by the effects of these pandemics. In the private sphere, as Professor Melise said before, they're taking responsibility to take care of those children that are out of school, to take care of elderly people, to take care of sick people. And many of them still have to guarantee the money or the survivance of their families. This gets even worse when we look at the figures in terms of racial differences. The last research that was made by Brazilian National Institute about hunger and food insecurity shows that the homes that are facing the worst numbers in terms of hunger and food insecurity in Brazil are those homes that are that have Black women in charge. So I think this tells a lot about our society also. And in the public sphere, almost more than 80% of the health professionals, nurses that are taking care of the sick people are women. Women are immersed in the risk of this pandemic, not only in Brazil, but worldwide. So if they are immersed in these risks, it's more than ever fair and urgent that they can take places of position in places of power, so that they can define the ways and the future of public politics, because these public policies are impacting their lives harder, and they are carrying in their backs the heavy weight of these irresponsible decisions that our white and male governance are putting forward. So this is how I finish my speech. Thank you very much. Let's go to the debate.
Thank you so much, Michele, for a very insightful presentation. And actually, thank you all for this very rare and precise combination of theoretical presentation with empirical data. I guess this combination helps us a lot to understand what's going on and to think forward. I still welcome everyone in the debate to participate, to post your questions in the chat box. We still have around 25 minutes to debate, so the floor is open to you too. But I'm going to start with some questions to our panelists. I have two questions that the first one looks at our past, and the other one at the present and the near future. The first one would be, given the political situation resulting from the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff, who was, as you have already mentioned, our first female president, until now, what types of advances or setbacks in the political representation of women can you identify? And what is the influence, if any, of this impeachment process on the Brazilian political culture and eventually on the process of democratic collapse that is observed today? So this is to understand how this event of our near past has impacted the participation of women in politics, even symbolically now. And the other one would be, Michelle has already started commenting on this, but I would also would like to see if the others want to comment too. How do you assess precisely the impacts of the pandemic on the political participation of women in Brazil, considering everything Michelle has already mentioned, that there is a possible worsening of the return of women to the domestic space, the overload of care tasks, often the loss of paid work, and even possibly the increase in domestic violence, just to name a few of the gender consequences of the pandemic. So how do you envision the near future for the political participation of women? And please feel free to, I don't know in which order you want to answer, and please feel free to choose which questions you want to answer. The floor is to you.
May I? So thank you, Gabriela, for the questions. I would like to start saying that it's not only the possible increase of private and domestic violence. It is real. It is really happening here today. And now on March 25th, we will launch the Feminist Uprising Against Feminicide. It is a national network of activists, of women, of civil and social movements that are engaging in this national campaign against feminicide. And if we say that feminicide is escalating, we can say and be sure that all kinds of violence are also growing up, because feminicide does not initiates with a gun in the head or something like that. It begins with the moral harassment and also psychological violence, and then physical violence, and then sexual violence. It's a cycle, as all of us know. So we have to deal here today in Brazil not only with the genocide in this government that is doing nothing to prevent this killing of people for the COVID-19, and now we have women inside their homes being killed also by the aggressor, by their husbands, their people that women normally usually love. So this is how we have to deal with violence today in Brazil. It's a huge problem. It's a very important problem. And as you said, this will have many impacts in political representation, because women had to go out of the market, go out of the occupations. They are unemployed. They will have to face those impacts almost by themselves. So this is the problem. How can you ask a woman to run for a political post, a political office, if she has to deal with the survivance of her family? I think we will get back in these indicators that are really worse, almost the worst ones of our Americas, Latin America countries. So this is the situation. I think it's really hard. I would like just to a little talk about. I am also in a group in TSE, the National Superior Electoral Tribunal, and we are talking about the legislation, about the changes that we must have, institutional changes, law changes that can improve women's empowerment and women's opportunities in politics. And we have this proposal running in our, this is a law proposal from a woman that wants to eliminate the gender quota from our system. this is now being discussed in our parliament. So what will happen if we don't have even 30% of women in the candidates list? So that's what we are facing just right now. And there are people that is saying that we don't need any more quota system because we will have 15% of quota. We will do that for women. And then everybody will be happy because this is not the beginning. It will be quickly the roof of this affirmative action. So this is what is being discussed in our parliament about the laws and the possibilities to improve women's participation and representation. Thanks.
I would add that not only this is dangerous because 15% would be the rooftop, but also because this could be an excuse to rediscuss equal access to campaign financing. So the 30% that are obligated now to be designated to women campaigns will also come to be rediscussed. So I think it's the old male patriarchy giving their response to the few advances that women managed to achieve in the public agenda. I would also add that there is another thing that we should be very aware and careful about, that the more conservative parties and politicians have been learning how to use gender and race arguments in favor of a conservative agenda. So we have now the challenge not only to support female candidates and Black women, but also to strengthen those who are committed to human rights, to women's rights, to democracy, because this thing that Professor Marlise said earlier, I think is one story, and we have many others of the growing conservative agenda that is being led by women and by Black people. It's a pity that this has been happening, but I think this is something that must be taken care of. But on the other hand, and here comes the good news, we had a very important advance in terms of progressive Black women, transgender women that managed to be in the elections, in the municipal elections last year. So we saw a huge, I wouldn't say a huge, I would say an important, even though it's small, but I think it could and should be bigger. But I think we have an important advance in terms of Black women, of transgender women, of progressive women that could win, especially not in the mayors, in the city halls. This still didn't get to the executive power, but in the legislative power, in the councils, the city councils, we have been seeing an important response of women's movements and social movements to fight against these attempts to backlash our rights. So this is what I would add.
I would add some things too. I agree with everything Professor Marlise and Michelle said. I think it's new older reactions to women progress, because there's new ways of doing, but the fight was always hard, and we have to keep fighting. I think all the situations like the impeachment of President Dilma, the increase of political violence, these are the way that these conservatives and this movement is the way they find to remind the woman that they don't belong to the public sphere, to the political sphere, and even in the domestic sphere, because we have a strong patriarchal culture in the sphere of the domestic sphere. Even the women head of the family, they survive for the family, they keep the family, and they keep the country. So I think this violence and these situations that we are dealing in Brazil is this reminder that we don't belong here. And so I think I want to say that these situations for me open like a Pandora box, and the mask of the democratic mask of some movements are falling down, because we now are seeing that the possibility of the woman, they see the possibility of woman be in the office, the possibility of the strong the movements, the woman movement, the feminist movement, the Black woman movement are, and they have to react to that. So for me, all these situations, they discourage the woman. I think the main impact is discourage. It is a violent environment, is a violent path. We don't have institutional support, financial. We have to fight against all the possibilities. And now they have some kind of ticket to say what they wanted, to make what they wanted. And apparently we can do nothing, but that's not true. We can do a lot. The fight we have to continue, and I think we have to demand that our institutional, more over and over and again, have to be more democratic, more strong for our path in the search for equality, a little bit of equality. So I think this, for me, the impact of the pandemic and the impeachment, they work together in that way. It's not easy, but I think we, like Michelle said, we have some progress, and we have to keep get how important this progress is. So I think for me,
may I add a few words? I would like to say that all this tragedy is happening in the moment that we have what I am calling the fourth wave of feminist movements in Latin America. I think this is the moment when the feminist movements are really potent, really important, really huge in Latin America. Women were inside the state when all of this began. Women were depatriarchalizing the state. This is really a reaction. This is something that is a consequence. This is something that is happening against the advances that the feminist movement, the women's movement made all over Latin America and also here in Brazil. And we can see the Black women's movements that they are so important, so huge. And this is the moment that we are facing this huge obstacle. So I think this is a paradox, but it also a good news, because we have forces in the civil society that will fight against this. Will fight against this backlash,
Thank you so much, you all. We have lots of comments congratulating you for the lectures, both on YouTube and here. I wanted you to know that. And just for us to finish, because we have just a few more minutes, I have one last question, and then we'll ask you to also give your final remarks or anything you want to say lastly. The question would be that in addition to the attacks that women candidates or women that occupy spaces in public offices, we see that the gender equality agenda itself has been attacked with clear setbacks even in Brazil's position in foreign policy, for example, and the creation of new obstacles to access legally recognized rights, such as the access to legal abortion, just to give one example. So I wonder if you could give some comments on how this anti-gender wave on the federal government's political agenda can also impact women's political participation in Brazil, But on the other hand, also how have been women's movements reacting to give us a glimpse of hope to finish this event today?
I would like to start now. I think this question complement a little bit what we said in the other questions, but I want to highlight the fact that we're going to feel the impacts in the long term. We have the lack of politics for women in general. We had setback policies, and I think what I'm saying about the ticket to violence in appearance of democracy opinion now growing now in this increase the violence and by the public opinion, by the people and by the government, because less politics, setback, these attacks to gender agenda, these are violence. So I think empirically talking, we have some decrease of the candidates woman in not only representation, but participation in the space of political participations inside the institutional and outside these institutionals, like associations and community and others too. And we have some difference between, I think we will see more difference between the local elections and the national elections, because the race that Professor Marlies said is more intense when we're talking about the Congress election. And the local elections, they work in a different logic, but in all this way, what I want to say, it's the importance of this electoral system and party system. They have to change. That the impacts and what we are seeing about this movement against the agenda and against the women movements, we have to work by institutionals, these institutionals ways. But I think the importance, the power of the movement are important here. This kind of space we are now discussing, these events, this kind of bring to the public the discussion. This is important because this increase the perception of the inequality. So if still this debate be just between our equals in the academy, in our institutes, the population don't really have some perception of this inequality. So I think this is a movement that the women movement and all these are important that we do that also.
I would say that we have, as part of civil society, as part of political parties and feminist movement, we have an important challenge in the next months and periods, not only to guarantee that women survive in their houses, that they have access to food, to proper jobs, to a decent life, but also that they don't die because of violence in the households and also in the public space, in the public sphere. We have been seeing a huge increase of violence against women. And I think from what we have observed in the Latin American experience, this violence is an expected response produced by men to the unwished presence of women in the public in public spaces and in position of power. So more than ever, we must fight for more women in politics, but for more secure conditions for them to be there. And we have to bring all the democratic institutions to play their role to guarantee these conditions. And when I say this, I'm talking about political parties, I'm talking about the electoral bodies, I'm talking about public policies from the different levels of government, and I'm talking about even about the responsibility of companies, of companies, and digital platforms and social networks that have also responsibility to prevent and to face the political violence and the violence overall against women, because we have seen also a very big increase of political marketing based on hate discourses and on speeches based on violence against women, against Black people. And we have the challenge to think together about strategies to make these kind of thing unacceptable in a country and in a continent that reivindicates themselves as a democratic nations. So this is what I would say to finish my presentation, and I would like to thank you very much. I'd like to say that I learned a lot from you. It was a very big pleasure and an honor to be here to spend this afternoon. It's a pity that we cannot be together and in presence, but it was very important for me to be in contact with all your knowledge and your energy to move on. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you too. So I would like to say that political violence against women and against Black women and against LGBTQ people and the anti-gender agenda, the anti-gender politics are connected. We need to know that. This is not disconnected. I think this is the language of the deep democratization of Brazil and our states in modern society today. This is the risk, that democracy is at risk. We need to understand that. So they are part of this new conservative project of power. This is what it is. We know that this new project links economy, social and political realms, all in this united project that are trying to maintain the status quo, trying to maintain a society and that is patriarchal, a society that is racist, a society that is capitalist and exploring the resources, and that is making climate change do not exist. They are not believing in science. They don't believe in climate change. This is the same project. We need to face that. We need to understand that they are really working together, and we need to understand at least that gender, race, ethnic questions, they are not identitarian. They are in the core of democratic dispute today, because they are the frontiers where the democracy haven't come for those people. They didn't have democratic rights. We were fighting for them. We are fighting for them. So that's why we are in the center of this new conservative dispute today. But we are prepared for this fight. That's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Let us finish there, because this is amazing to give us hope and energy to move forward, right? We have a dire scenario in front of us, but at least we are together. We are keeping the fight, and we are going to go forward, fortunately. Thank you so much. Thank you for the honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was
Renata,
amazing.
Michele, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who was watching.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. Also, Professor Marlise, Michele was amazing. In an honor for me. Thank you.
For us. Bye bye, everybody.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
Let's
Bye,
do the
everyone.
fight. Let's do the fight. It's necessary, but we are prepared. We are here for that. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.